This is a fact. The society of guys becomes stratified somewhere in the fourth grade, and nothing changes for the next 70 years. You can see this at any social gathering. There are jocks, ladies' men, nerds, and the nameless, faceless masses, all crowded into small groups. But you never see guys from one group mixing with another. Of course, some athletes can be ladies' men, and some nerds can be faceless. But in general, they all remain at the same level they occupied when they were 9 years old. I've never been a ladies' man, but I was an athlete, so to speak. I was a swimmer in college, which most athletes don't consider a sport. But my university letter looked the same as everyone else's, and so I usually found myself in the group of athletes when they gathered for homecomings. The only thing I hate more than talking to a bunch of people I don't know, talking about things I don't care about. But I still stood there. This was because my wife Janet requested my presence. I believe her exact words were, "Come meet or you won't get any sex, cowboy." And since my wife is still a very hot little thing, I wasn't going to leave her unattended while her former classmates were ogling her cheerleader body. That's why I stood next to Mike Harper on the 15th anniversary of our graduation. Mike was a very average football player, but he was a ladies' man of the highest order. I was neither one nor the other. But since I was standing next to him in the official varsity tent, he simply decided that I deserved attention, and he was definitely staring at Janet. He turned to me, like a real man to another, and said, "Just look at that chick there." Seriously, he's 36 years old, and he just called a mother of two a chicken. I glanced lazily towards Janet. She stood with her back to us. Her long, beautiful legs with well-developed calf muscles and her gorgeous round ass were adorned in a relatively modest little black dress. Her thick, beautiful brown hair fell in waves down her back, just above her narrow, feminine hips. She's still dancing, and she was a gymnast and a cheerleader in college. To say that she has retained a slender body is to say nothing. But it was her intelligence, humanity, cheerful outlook on life, and fundamentally strong moral values that I fell in love with. Why she fell in love with me is a mystery, but the gods work in mysterious ways, and I didn't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. So I just accepted my luck and married her. And thanks to Janet and our 10-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter, I am a very happy person. Harper's voice brought me back to the present moment. He said, "I remember her from when I played. She was the hottest cheerleader on the field. I watched her when I wasn't on the field. I heard from other guys that she was the wildest lover, but I don't have it. It was such a pleasure." It was a little unsettling. I was forced to take his words at face value, because I didn't know Janet in college. We studied at the same educational institution, but it was large, and our paths did not cross. There were no cheerleaders for the swim meet. In fact, we were happy if 100 people showed up. I met her in graduate school. We are both MBAs. If she was a great lover then, it wasn't with me. So everything Harper said gave me a wave of nostalgia for those wild frat parties. I wasn't exactly celibate. Many women like the slender body of a swimmer more than the muscular types of football players, and that's why I had enough hot women. However, I could personally confirm that the title of World's Wildest Mistress still applies to my wife even after 12 years of marriage. In fact, she spent hours lovingly proving this to me last night. I had forgotten how uninhibited and loud she can be when our kids aren't around. Harper said conspiratorially, "Do you know anything about her? Is she married? What's her story?" I said, just as conspiratorially, "She sure is married, man. Can't you see the size of the stone on her finger? And she seems like a really cool chick." If he could go back to being a teenager, so could I. I added, "A woman like her probably has children, and she would never cheat on her family." I said this with conviction because I knew and believed it. He laughed mockingly and said, "Do you want to bet? These are the easiest ones." This made me seriously angry. I said heatedly, "Why should I argue about some poor woman's fidelity with a man I don't even know?" He grabbed my hand, shook it, and said, "Mike Harper, nice to meet you. How much do you want to bet?" What's with these simple-minded idiots? Life is just a game for them. Every guy in the treehouse is a friend, and every woman is a conquest. I should have told him right away that I was Janet's husband. Anything short of this was morally unacceptable. But Janet was the one who put this fool on me. I hate homecomings, and she dragged me there screaming and yelling. So now I just went with the flow. I know, I'm probably too calm. If I thought this idiot had any chance of success with Janet, I would have just walked away. I love my wife too much to use her as a bet. But this guy's attitude towards her was so arrogant that I was furious. And I do really stupid things when I'm angry. I said with contempt in my voice, "You could pester this woman for a month, and you still wouldn't know if she was the wildest lover in the world. I can recognize the faithful, and I'm willing to bet she retains all her passion for your happy husband." Shithead could tell I was angry, so he decided to turn me on even more. He said, "Afraid to put your money on your confidence, and why don't you give a damn about another man's wife?" I said, "Because if I argue with you, I'm encouraging you to do something that I think is disgusting." He laughed loudly and said, "I take what I want, weakling. That's the way of all of us alpha males. If you're not man enough to make a man's deal, I'll just keep you posted. But one way or another, I'm going to reach that sweet little bitch between now and next month." This was the moment when I was sure that he would try, no matter what I said, and I wanted to be aware of the situation. So I grinned and said, "What's your email address, buddy? I'll email you, and you can brag about it. That is, if you're man enough. But if you want me to believe you, I want a detailed report." He said disdainfully, "I will be pleased to inform you." I said, "Remember, in a month you will lose." He said with contempt in his voice, "This won't take me 5 days." Then he gave me a business card and left, grinning. Real estate. How appropriate. That evening I wrote to him from my Gmail account. I just created one under the name Hot Car Guy 69. I thought it would be close to something Dickhead would expect from another member of his boys' club, and it was as far from my real personality as it could be. Meanwhile, Janet was very disappointed with the reunion. I was glad about this. She told me that the women present were either divorcees who were looking to find their next husband, or they were girls who never grew up after their student life. I wanted to tell her that I had met a famous sorority boy who would make all her friends look completely mature. Actually, I should have done it. But the whole problem seemed so childish that I didn't want to admit that I got involved in it. It was awkward, and I had a feeling that Janet would not be happy to know who the target was and how easily I had been deceived. Then she started killing me with sex. I think the realization that we had grown up after college had finally dawned on her, and it made her insatiable. It was as if she was trying to get in touch with her new reality as a mother and a highly trained professional, blowing my brains out. A couple of days passed, and I forgot about the conversation with Dickhead. That's when my smartwatch told me I had an email. Since the only thing my watch was synced with was a specific Gmail account, I knew I had to sneak a look at it. But that will be after Janet goes to bed. Studboy 1980 was just checking. Found out where she worked. Don't know why a hot girl like her isn't at home taking care of her kids and husband like a woman should. It makes me feel better, though. Janet worked as a senior MBA economist at a local brokerage firm. This guy was selling houses. I answered briefly. 3.5 weeks remained unlucky. On Friday afternoon of the first week, study 1980 sent. Caught her at lunch. Always eats in the same place. She fell for the new you in school gambit. In a week, she will be mine. At the same time, I assumed that Janet allowed him to approach her at lunch. So as soon as she walked through the door, I asked, "How was your day?" I thought meeting an old school friend was so unusual that she mentioned it to me. That is, if she acted above suspicion. Immediately she said, "The strangest thing has happened. I was having lunch with Lydia and Chantel and ran into Mike Harper. You probably don't know him, but he played football and was friends with some of the guys I worked with." I didn't mention what these guys said about her wild sexual history. She continued happily, "We reminisced for a while. He seems like a very interesting guy. This struck me with a bolt of jealousy, but I said, I know the guy you're talking about, and he was an thoroughbred hound back then. You'd better stay away from him. I don't think a leopard will ever change his spots. She laughed cheerfully and said, well, he must have changed a lot over the next 15 years, because now he's a really nice guy, happily married with 4 children, and he loves his wife. He wanted to know everything about my family and children, and you, of course. I thought to myself, yes, right, this bastard is just laying the groundwork for your seduction. There was nothing in the ground rules that prevented me from turning this into a teaching moment. So I said, look at me, Janet. She turned a very guileless look at me. I said, this is the standard approach that every predator takes. If he can make you believe that he is only interested in your children and your husband, then he will create the idea that he respects your marriage and you. I added, this will allow him to creep closer without increasing your defense. Janet laughed cheerfully and said, I don't need any stinking protection. I love you and I love my children, and I would never betray any of you. Besides, why would anyone want a 35-year-old mother of 2? I wish she would take what I say more seriously. But on the other hand, Janet is a very capricious woman. She is, of course, gorgeous. She wasn't the same college gymnast she used to be, but she still has a lithe, muscular body, and having 2 children has increased her breast size by 2 sizes. So it looked like sex on a stick. We met at business school. She studied economics, and I studied information systems. Since then, she has quickly risen through the ranks of the brokerage company where she works, and I'm the CIO at Landmark Systems. Together, we lead a very productive and comfortable life. I might add that life is focused on our 2 children. That's why Harper's little game was especially despicable. His quest to prove who is in charge has put the happiness of 4 innocent people at risk. And if his wife is not the type to be patient, maybe 5 more on top. I was again tempted to tell Janet about the challenge Harper thought he was giving, but I was almost sure that she would kill me and feed me to her cubs before I could utter any excuse for my deception. And of course, it was so humiliating to admit it. That's why I didn't say anything. That night, Janet and I had a long and loving episode. It was as if she was trying to convince me that her conversation with Harper had no effect on us. And of course, this did not happen. It's because that stupid bastard told me everything he did, so I would never let it get that far. We took the kids to the zoo that weekend and visited our grandparents on Sunday. Janet's mother and father live in the area, and we dine at their house every chance we get. Her parents adore their 2 children, and of course, Harper's plans would also ruin this relationship. Therefore, I added 2 more counts to his indictment. He contacted me the following Tuesday. He said, this time she was left alone. I spent the entire lunch break catching up. Mentioned some of her wildest moments in Alpha Foo, and she didn't deny it. The chick wants me. I can say that. I retorted, in your dreams. Just talk and no action. The following Thursday I received. Picked her up and took her to lunch. She thinks I work in the next building. Now I'm talking to her about sex. I'm starting to relax her. I retorted, 2 weeks left, like a loser. She didn't tell me anything about it. This was getting serious. I really didn't see any reason why she should go out of her way to tell me about it, because she is allowed to communicate with other people. But I didn't like the fact that Harper actually advanced to one-on-one status with her, and I wanted to get to the bottom of the conversation about sex. We sat in the living room while the kids did their homework upstairs. I said casually, so what happened to that college guy? I think his name was Mike Harper. She said without any deception in her voice, oh, he bumped into me again while I was eating alone. He works in the next building. It reminded me of some embarrassing things I did at a few parties in college. I was very immature back then. I wanted to make sure he never told you about it, so I made him find out what he knew. Okay, that sounded plausible and completely honest. I said with some doubt in my voice. Have you seen him since then? She actually blushed and said, Yeah, he just showed up at work today and said he was buying me lunch because he had a serious problem he wanted to talk about. When we got there, he said he had a serious problem. Problems in marriage. It seems his wife is not interested in sex, and he asked for female advice. I looked suspicious, so she quickly added, I would be wary too, but he is so deeply committed to his wife and marriage. I tried to give him some advice on what works for me. This caused me a wave of anxiety. She just handed him a road map of what turns her on. I said incredulously, You were discussing our sex life with a stranger. She laughed and said, Oh God, no. I was just giving a general overview of what women like. He was very appreciative. He said he'd try it this weekend. This made me angry. I brought her into this situation, and now there was no way I could admit it. That is, without sounding as immature as the young fool I was conspiring with. But I didn't like that I now had to rely on Janet's inner gyroscope to keep us both from getting divorced. So I broke out. I said, You're getting too close to this guy. You shouldn't be discussing these things with him. She said calmly, Are you discussing sex with Mary or Phyllis? These were two of my subordinates, who were also women. Mary was over 40 and divorced. Phyllis was a hot little nerd for about 30 years. Both led very active sex lives. I said, Of course. What happens to them outside of work affects their work. I try to give them good advice from a man's point of view. It's nothing personal. Janet looked at me as if I had just proved her point. I hate it when she's right. I blurted out, This is a different situation. You don't work with this guy, and you have no reason to discuss such things with him. I want you to stop having lunch with him. I realized how hypocritical that sounded. She looked angry and said, When did you regress into the cave again, giving me ultimatums? She was right. But I was desperate. She didn't see Harper as the predator he was. I mumbled, You're beautiful, and I don't want to share you with any other man. Her angry expression instantly melted. She said lovingly, You're jealous. It's so touching. I have no interest in another man, especially Mike Harper. That's why I'm taking this whole conversation so lightly. It's incredibly far from me discussing his marriage, so I can jump into bed with him. And she laughed merrily. It was another wonderful weekend. We went to both of the kids' soccer games and then talked to other parents. And on Sunday, there was a neighbor's barbecue. Janet was especially passionate all weekend. I hoped it wasn't out of guilt. The call came at 2 on Wednesday. She said there was an emergency at work and she would be late. I told her I would buy pizza for the kids. She told me she would be home no later than 9:30, and we did the sweet kissing that all married couples do when they say goodbye. Then it dawned on me. She's dating this bastard. I called back, but her phone went straight to voicemail. And at work, they said that she was in a meeting until 5:30. I called back at 5:30, and no one answered at the brokerage firm. I sent her a message, but she didn't reply. So I fed the children and kicked a ball with them in the yard. Then I sat and waited. It would be an understatement to say that I was concerned. My happiness depended on what happened next. She returned around 10 p.m. Every second after 9:30 was a torment of doubt. I spent half an hour imagining her in the back seat of Harper's car, knees up and legs flailing while he had her. She looked very upset and nervous. To make matters worse, she wasn't wearing the same outfit she'd worn to work. The little black dress she was wearing showed off her gorgeous, toned thighs. Needless to say, the overall look was much sexier than her work clothes, and she was heavily made up. Her hair was disheveled, her lipstick was smeared, and there was a small hole in the neckline of her dress. But thank God, she didn't look satisfied. Instead, she looked scared. She stopped, ashamed, in the hallway. I invited her to sit on the sofa. She walked towards him hesitantly, trying to understand my mood. I sat down opposite her in one of the chairs in the living room. I said calmly, "How was your evening?" She burst into tears. She said, "Oh God, I'm so sorry, Terry." I was in a state of controlled anger. I said, "Why did you lie to me?" Of course, I knew the answer, but I wanted to hear it from her. She said, I was planning to change into my work clothes before coming home, and you would never have known. But he attacked me in the parking lot. He kissed me and tried to feel my breasts, and it upset me so much that I just ran back here to safety. She looked at me pleadingly and said, I know it looks bad, but all I did was agree to have dinner with him. I didn't give him permission to grope me. I added, You forgot the part where you lied to me to do this. Between sobs, she said, I knew you wouldn't approve, but I thought I was doing the right thing, so I went with him without you knowing. He told me it would help him regain his confidence. I said, That's bullshit. You deliberately went on a date with this guy. It's betrayal, pure and simple, and you know it. That's why you didn't want to tell me. I said, getting angrier, put yourself in my shoes. What would you think if I lied to you so I could spend the evening with my ex-college lover? Her face turned pale. She said, Say no more. It would destroy me. Then I slyly said, I wonder what his wife would say if I called her and asked her what she thought about the situation. It got to her. She said, Oh God, don't do this. His marriage is in enough trouble already. This will kill him. I said threateningly, What do you think you just did to ours? She burst into tears. She said, I'm so sorry. What can I do to make it up to you? I laughed bitterly and said, It's already happened. You've already lied to me. There's nothing to make up for. I added, I'm sleeping in the guest room, and leave me alone. I moved all my stuff while you were on your date. She said sullenly, It was just dinner. It wasn't a date. I said, Potatoes are potatoes. In my eyes, it was a date, and my eyes are the only ones that matter now. It will be a long time before I trust you again. Then I stood up and tried to look decent while I headed upstairs to my lonely bed. She knocked and tried to talk to me, but I'm already done talking. I told her I'd think about it and we'd talk in the morning. I heard her sobbing at the end of the corridor. I returned, knocked, and entered our bedroom. She jumped up as if I had come to forgive her, perhaps to enjoy some hot make-up sex. Instead, I said, Don't make noise here. You'll upset the kids. Her face darkened, and she returned to sobbing. I closed the door and went back to my room. It was cruel. I knew it, but I wanted her to feel as bad as I did. The only thing I got was the fact that the deadline was tomorrow and the shithead would be gone. I wasn't done with him yet, but first I wanted to stop the bleeding in my marriage before giving him the punishment he deserved. As expected, Study 1980 sent a letter. He boasted, Took this bitch out to dinner. She got all dressed up for me. I knew she wanted me, but she chickened out when we got back to my car. She let me kiss her a little, but when I went to her breasts, I was scared. I was so close to taking her. I could feel her excitement. I replied, Too bad, loser. The deadline is up, and you've lost. Find another poor woman to molest, because the bet will be void at midnight. He replied, LMFAO, no bitch gives me bruises or gets away with it. I'll make her my personal bitch, no matter the cost. I just won't entertain you anymore while I'm doing it. I replied, A bet is a bet. I'll tell everyone you're a fool and a loser if you don't leave this. He replied, Are you her husband? I would believe it, the way you act. But this bitch is too hot for someone like you. I've changed my mind. I'll have sex with her and tell you how much fun it was. I replied, Remember this conversation when bad things start happening to you, dickless. I was going to take revenge on him with interest, but first I had to fix my marriage. The fact that the bastard was still after Janet was causing me serious torment, because I just destroyed a lot of bridges with her. So no matter what it cost me, I had to lay all my cards on the table. I didn't sleep a wink. Janet looked like she hadn't slept either. We sent the children to school. Then I reported that I was sick. She is too. I said, We need to get this under control now. We've always dealt with problems in our marriage together, and this is a particularly nasty situation. She began to cry. She said, I can't express how sorry I am. It's my fault. it's time for the truth. I needed a cleanse too. If the lies must stop. I looked into her beautiful oval face, framed by long brown hair, and said as evenly as possible, "No, not you." She said, "What does this mean?" I said, "I'm as guilty as you are. Plain and simple." She looked puzzled. I said, "Remember homecoming last month?" She said hesitantly, "Yes," I said. "I stood with Harper as he wondered if he could get you to repeat your old college days. He heard all the stories and felt like he had missed an opportunity." She blushed with embarrassment and said, "You know about this?" I said, "Yes, of course I do," and winked at her lustfully. She hit me on the shoulder and said, "And you didn't tell me that you knew. It was a couple of years before we met, and I was young and stupid then." I continued, "But that's not the worst part." She looked worried. I said, "He didn't know we were married. I told him he had no chance with a woman like you. I said you are a wife and mother and would never betray your children and husband." I added, "He took it as a challenge, so he wanted to bet he could get you into bed. I told him I wouldn't encourage his behavior by betting on your fidelity, so he told me he'd take you anyway, and he'll tell me everything while he's doing it." I added, "I couldn't change his mind, so I decided to keep an eye on him. I should have just told you, but I was ashamed of how far things had gone. He's been sending me regular emails since then, updating me on his progress. I can show them to you if you want, but he was completely playing with you." She took it all in, and she became redder and redder every second. I knew she would explode. The question was who. She responded to this question by saying, "You are a complete idiot. You knew what was going on this whole time and didn't tell me because you were shamed." Now it was my turn to look embarrassed. She said, "I want you to stay away from me until I calm down. I didn't tell you about last night. It was disrespectful, and I'm sorry. But it was just one night, and you watched me like I was a lab rat, 30 days straight. This level of disrespect makes me wonder who I married." She was right, but I was angry. I said, "If you had just told Dickless to go to hell like I told you, we wouldn't be having this conversation." She said, "And if you hadn't put me in this position, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Maybe I'll just sleep with him and make him happy." This was the last straw. I said, "If you do anything other than tell this bastard to go to hell, we better start dividing up the property, because we're going to end up." With these words, I left the house, slamming the door. I reached the car, and common sense overtook me. I just challenged my wife, the mother of my children, to be unfaithful to me, and she said she was going to do it. Needless to say, this was not very smart. We are upper-middle-class professionals with good education and high positions, and now we were acting like a couple of high school kids breaking up over a guy at prom. She lied to me. I lied to her. It was time to figure it out. I turned around and returned to the house. She was upstairs throwing things and crying. These were angry tears, not the ones she shed last night in shame. I shouted up the stairs, "I'm back, and I'm not going anywhere until we figure this out." She screamed back, "Leave me alone." Well, at least she talked to me. I went to the office. There were things I should have known a month ago. I didn't pay enough attention to the background details because I didn't take Harper seriously. Now I perceive it. I did a deep search on the internet, and then bought his whole life for $39.95. The first thing I noted was an important aspect of his marriage. This was something that Shithead clearly hadn't mentioned to Janet. It was the fact that he had been divorced for over 3 years. His wife, Michelle, and his 4 children lived in Asheville, North Carolina, which was a long way from his home in Brighton, Michigan. There were numerous records of delays in child support payments. But the most interesting thing, there was a year-old alienation of affection lawsuit he was pursuing in his former hometown. North Carolina is one of the few states where such a remedy is still permitted. I printed it all out and placed the sheets vertically in a napkin holder on the kitchen counter. I shouted upstairs, "I'll leave for a while. There's something I'd like you to see in the kitchen when you're done being mad at me." She screamed, Fuck you, HM. This may require more than a dozen roses. I had Harper's card. His place of work was not in the building next door to Janet's home in Ann Arbor. It was 30 miles away in Howell, Michigan. It was approaching lunchtime. Maybe it's time for me to buy him some snacks. His office was located on the Grand River in the heart of an old Michigan village. It used to be agriculture, but the neighborhood was growing by leaps and bounds, and Harper's office looked pretty busy. He was just a salesman, not an owner, but the whole place seemed prosperous enough for Harper to be able to pay child support. I said to the guy who greeted me at the door, "I need to talk to Mike Harper. Where is he?" The owner said, "He got a call a few minutes ago, and he left suddenly. He said he'd be in Ann Arbor all day." A lightning bolt of melancholy pierced me. He and Janet were dating. My concern was so obvious that the owner asked, "Is there a problem?" I thought, what the fuck? He might as well know what kind of scumbag he's hiring. So I told him the whole dirty story. I made it with a lot of love and detail, including what it seemed to me like he was doing to my wife right at that very moment. The owner looked more and more shocked. Reality depends on trust, and this guy's business reputation would be seriously damaged if Harper played with the local housewives. I ended by saying, "I knew him in college, and he only thinks in one place. There's no way he's going to change his self-destructive behavior." The owner said, "Well, if it's any consolation, he's dead in this business in Michigan. Do you have a copy of this report? I'm going to take away his license." I said, "Sure, let me use your computer." The final report was another $39.95 well spent. The usual thing now would be to hook up with Harper and his wife, but she already knew he was an adulterous piece of shit. However, I called her anyway, just to leave no stone unturned. She answered the second call. Her voice sounded strong. I guess having 4 kids with this idiot would make anyone cool. I introduced myself and told her in general terms what happened. She laughed evilly and said, "That's his standard modus operandi. I forgave him the first 2 times. I was stupid." We talked about his child support situation. I told her that he had just lost his job. She said, "It doesn't matter. I'm going to get married again, and my new husband is rich and loves my children. I'll just sue the bastard until he pays." I wished her well and hung up. I was heading to the Ann Arbor area, and my next call was home. I have a voicemail there, so I called Janet's cell phone. It was turned off. I thought she would probably pick up the kids from school. That's why I went there. Billy and Brookie were in the meeting area, but Janet was not there. They were very happy to see me, since my mother usually did the carrying. I wrote to Janet that I have children. We had a quick visit to Dairy Queen, and they went to play some kids' video games. They were sweet and wonderful little people, and I will miss them if what I suspected actually happened. I sat down to wait. I needed to stay strong for the sake of the children, but the more time passed, the sadder and angrier I became. I imagined the 2 of them having wild sex in some seedy motel, and it was killing me. As the day wore on, Janet still did not appear. The children asked about her several times. I told them she works late. We had Chinese takeaway. Children especially like sweet and sour chicken. I made them start doing their homework and waited a little longer. If the stress hadn't killed me by then, it was a tribute to the cardio I'd accumulated from all those miles I'd swam. When the bell rang, it was already about 18:30. I picked up the phone and said with alarm, "Yes, hello?" The official voice on the other end of the line said, "Mr. Terry Baumgartner, please." I said, "That's him." The voice said, "This is Officer Marlon Adams, Ann Arbor Police. We're holding your wife downtown, and we need you to come here and talk to us. We can free her as soon as you do." Okay, this news almost really killed me. My blood pressure was probably fluctuating between 500 and 495 when I called Mrs. Wilson. She was a kind old widow who lived next door. I asked her if she could help me with the children. I told her that Janet needed me to pick her up. Since I had no idea what was going on, I did not go into detail about the circumstances. At 72, Anna Wilson is still an energetic old lady. 15 minutes after I called, she was in my living room, unloading a large bag of knitting. And 20 minutes later, in a panic, I appeared in the public area of the police department. My wild look probably alerted the policeman who was awaiting my arrival, because a large, friendly-looking policeman had separated from the group behind the front desk. He came up to me and asked questionably, "Mr. Baumgartner?" I blurted out. "Yes," he said, "let's talk." And he turned and walked toward one of those side rooms that police departments everywhere set aside for the conversations we were about to have. I looked at the front desk and said, "I need to know my wife's status first." He said, "I can tell you all this." With my heart in my throat, I followed him into the 8 by 10-foot green room. I had an inappropriate thought. What is it about green vomit that is so attractive to law enforcement? He sat down and looked at me for a minute, sizing me up in classic policeman fashion. Finally, he said, "We arrested your wife this afternoon on a charge of assault." I must have looked as stunned as I felt, because he continued, "She poured a cup of hot coffee on the head of a man she was talking to at Starbucks on Main. This constitutes simple assault. So, at the man's request, we arrested her and put her through the booking process." He kindly said, "We're keeping her here instead of in the jail across town because she says there are extenuating circumstances, and that you explain them to us." The facts of the situation dawned on me in a delightful flash of insight, and all I could think was, I hope it was Venti. I said, "My wife has been stalked by a sexual predator for the past month. You saw her, so you can see why. She met with him today to personally beg him to leave her alone." I didn't know if what I just said was true, but I could make an educated guess. I added, "I wasn't there, but I'm guessing he must have either done or said something inappropriate, and that she reacted in the same defensive way." "I wasn't there, but I'm guessing he either did or said something inappropriate, and she reacted the way she did, defensively." The officer said, "She told me he tried to grab her arm. Given Harper's style, this could very well be true." I told Adams the whole terrible story. He's probably heard something like this 1,000 times throughout his career. He looked sympathetic, so I said, "I understand that she crossed the line, but is there a way to release her on her own recognizance?" I thought, what a coward. Dickless is charged with assault with a woman who is 45 kg lighter and half a head shorter. I can't wait for this rumor to spread around town. The policeman looked a little relieved. He probably had the same thoughts about Harper that I did, and I'm sure interacting with this asshole didn't make him any more attractive to the cop. He said, "She'll have to sign some papers, but I think it's possible. Just wait in the lobby and we'll let her out." I stood up and shook the policeman's hand. He turned out to be a great guy. I returned to the lobby. The desk sergeant handed me some forms to sign, and within minutes they were leading my beautiful little prisoner across the station to where I stood. She smiled like a happy Labrador who had brought a bird. She showed no remorse. On the contrary, she looked very pleased with herself. She came up to me with her lithe gait of a dancer and threw her arms around my neck, hugging me. I said in my best Jimmy Cagney voice, "I got you out of the big house, Magsy, so don't mess around anymore until we get out of here." She laughed cheerfully. In fact, all the cops laughed. Looks like my wife made an impression while she was serving her time. In addition, men always tend to be condescending with beautiful women. She continued to be pleased with herself as we drove home. I said, still imitating Jimmy Cagney's voice from The Public Enemy, "Okay, so what happened, Magsy?" Her evil laugh sent a signal. She said, "I forgave you as soon as I read what you left for me. This man is a sociopath. There is no way any of us can see through his twisted behavior. I was planning on just telling him to leave me alone. Peace. But I wanted a little personal satisfaction after he deceived me." She smiled vindictively and said, "So I called him at work and told him to meet me at the Starbucks on the corner of Main and Liberty downtown." She smiled mischievously and added, "Maybe I let him know he was going to win. He was whining about the place, but the campus inn is right on East Huron, and I think he thought my meeting him in public was just my kind of foreplay. I didn't like that last part, but everything was already in the past. She smiled evilly and said, I had 2 venti lattes on the table when he came. He looked like he wanted me. It was disgusting. I could imagine it. Janet is sitting there on one of those bar stools with her beautiful face and gorgeous body. It turned me on too. She continued, he tried to kiss me hello on the lips, I might add, but I turned away before he could do it. Her joyful expression turned to anger as she said, then he hugged me. I pushed him away. He sat down and started complaining about how I was making him feel as bad as his wife. She added with satisfaction in her voice, that's when I said, what do you mean, his ex-wife, right? Janet giggled and said, he looked stunned and then suspicious. He was clearly going to deny everything. He asked where I got such a strange idea, and I told him it was from this, and I handed him those papers you printed out. For me. She laughed and said, he looked puzzled. Then he read a little and realized that his cover was blown. The mask fell. His face changed from innocent and sensitive to cruel and arrogant. He actually laughed in my face. He told me he was going to get me into bed and that I'll like it. This statement drove me crazy. I decided that Harper and I would have a little private date. It will be on my terms and on my territory, without witnesses. But I'm a patient person, and Harper will pay in full for his misdeeds. I'm an average guy, but I'm very good at using my weapon, the telescopic baton. And Harper will find out how good I am when his knees meet a mysterious stranger in the dark night who has an airtight alibi. Janet continued, I told him quite definitely that he would be the last man I would ever imagine in bed with him. I told him that the thought had never even crossed my mind in all those moments when he was nursing. Me with his patented bullshit, and it's so far from my perception now that he'd better go home and fuck himself. She then said with satisfaction, I stood up to leave, and he grabbed my arm, holding me back. He said it wouldn't be over until he said it was over, so I took my full latte and poured it out on his head. Then I stood there and laughed while he thrashed and wheezed. He was still hot as Starbucks. She added, I was leaving when the manager stopped me. He said he called the police and I had to wait for them to arrive. They eventually asked Harper what he wanted to do with me, and he insisted on pressing charges. Janet's face twisted into a sneer, and she said, like a little girl. Then she added, and that's pretty much the whole story, Bugsy. The cops told me I could get a ticket for a misdemeanor. But after the officer heard my short version of the story, they all treated me like a heroine. So I don't think Harper will get much sympathy or satisfaction. I laughed and said, they have discretion in these cases. And after I told him the same story, I think the investigator wants to charge Harper with the crime of being a complete asshole. You did the right thing. And everyone who, when they hear this story, they'll think you should have used something stronger than a latte like hydrochloric acid. We got home around 8 p.m., just in time to put the kids to bed. My little prisoner was, as always, gentle. I looked at her. She was a magnificent woman. She stood looking at her children with love. Her thick brown hair fell over her large, curvy breasts. She stood with her hip thrust out, her long, beautiful legs in full view. I wanted her not to talk about it anymore. We closed the nursery door, and I took her hand. She looked at me with a deep, sexy look, and we headed to our bedroom. It had been a difficult 24 hours, but it was all over now. And that night she was very, very bad. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next